What are the big differences when it comes to how you handle your recreational bodybuilders? And again, recreational doesn't mean like, hey, like you ain't serious about this. It just means you don't want to do that last thing, and your competitive bodybuilders. Brian, what do you do differently?
Yeah, so I think when somebody applies that doesn't list, any aspirations for competing, the first thing we have to do is meet them where they're currently at. And that's true even if it's an aspiring competitor. A lot of like when I'm putting myself back in my shoes when I was in my early 20s, I wanted to compete, but it was always, okay, I need to gain more muscle. I need to gain more muscle. And sometimes we get those athletes, that regardless of whether or not they want to compete, most people are coming to us to improve body composition. And so, or, compete in powerlifting. So with that said, I think there's times where it becomes very evident that, okay, we need to put this person in a long-term, gaining phase. But there's situations where, the flip side is true, where we might have somebody inquire that just wants to improve body comp, and the first thing we need to do is, get some fat loss taken care of. And we have competitors that will apply, and that's still the first thing that maybe sometimes we should do. So I think regardless of what you apply for, you're going to get the same treatment out of the gate. Like we still have to meet you where you're at and go from there. Because I think there's a lot of similarities, like you said. I think with, aspiring competitors, they're focused more kind of on the fat loss side of things. They're thinking kind of forward towards contest prep, and it might take some time to get to that point. And for the non-competitor, it's, it can go either way. And so with these situations, I think it's just important to understand that each athlete is a little bit different, and sometimes it takes some hard discussions, with what you're trying to get out of them as an athlete, and managing expectations is sometimes part of that. So, I think there's a lot of similarities though, especially with like initial fat loss. And I know we talked about this a bit before the call, but I think people that are I think there's more similarities than differences. I'll say that. But people that are competing, that are entering a fat loss phase, usually it's like, we don't need to go like full Tupperware meal plan mode, like they don't need to be like completely militant with everything, even if they're a competitor out of the gate, especially if there's an open-ended timeline. So I think for me, that's kind of something we can talk more about too, is what if it's a non-competitor with a deadline. It's like, okay, I want to look good for a cruise in August, or whatever. That can kind of change how you approach things too. So I think just the fact that there's a deadline with a contest prep, things you tend to have a little bit less wiggle room, but at some point there's significantly less. But out of the gate, I think we treat them pretty similarly.
I think the thing you said, Berto, about how when the recreational lifters, it's a little bit more of a relaxed setting, because they don't have this super hyper-focused goal of getting on stage, that the environment to progress in it's just a lot easier. It's more enjoyable too. So that's something like when I meet with people for the first time, even with contest preppers, I'm trying to create an environment where we can make progress, where it's obviously you're doing well, you're going towards your goals, but it's enjoyable. And also taking into consideration life context, like what's this person's situation like, family life, school life, whatever. Like, how can we make the process as smooth as possible? But you have to figure out with each person as far as like what makes them click, where they're at, like Brian said, where they're at as far as their skill set. Are they new to dieting? Are they experienced dieters? Are they new to training or not? So, based off of like what you gather in that first conversation, of course you got to set, protocol up to where, you're going to get as much progress as you can, not just physically, but also the mental side, the emotional side, and, in a sense, just creating really good habits. So, like for me personally, as a coach, those are the things that I try to focus on the most is like big picture stuff, like trajectory. Like, what is the goal? Most people's goals, whether you're competing or not, it's going to be, like Brian said, body composition. Everybody wants to get bigger and wants to be leaner. So it's like setting trajectory is probably the first step. Like, okay, is this going to be a year process? Is it a 2-year process? Is it a 5-year process? And you kind of like, once you kind of establish like what that timeline might look like, if it's a 5-year process, that more times than not, it's going to require a lot of like skill building, and not just in the weight room, like with everything. Whereas someone who's maybe a little more advanced, it might take them a year to kind of change that body composition that I want. So it's more about just figuring each person out where they're at and then kind of going from there. But I think like me, like Brian, like the similarities I think is more so than the differences between like prep and just, in a sense, the recreational lifter. The only thing I think the differences for me would be just the extremism, because now we're talking like most people, neighborhood of 12, 15%. That's your recreational lifter. You're going to look decent. You're going to feel really good energy. You can manage, life settings really well at that body composition. But contest prep, now we're getting down to like single digits. And oftentimes, we're talking maybe 6%, 7%. On rare occasions, maybe even a touch below that. And that's a whole nother animal. So yeah, that's kind of where my thought is right now on that.
See, I think what competitive or bodybuilders who aspire to be competitive bodybuilders, they kind of sign off on, they consent on, is the fact that anytime you go from recreational to competitive, you're kind of, to some extent, not that this is the goal, but like safety is a little bit less of a concern, right? So someone who has a goal of squatting 700 pounds, it's like, if you could just squat 4 plates, like that's a pretty strong dude, like life would be a lot simpler, but like this person wants to push to that. But they understand that they're like, damn, this weight could staple me if something goes wrong. And the same thing with competitive bodybuilding. It's like when, you decide that, okay, I want to go up on that stage, maybe a little body dysmorphia, like that might, a transient, like, about with disordered eating. It's like, yes, coach, I read the Minnesota starvation experiment and now I still want to do this. Let's go. So sometimes because they are so anxious to get there, they don't want to work on the little bottlenecks that end up impeding them on the way to the stage. And this is precisely why a lot of recreational bodybuilders end up being better bodybuilders, because they are in no rush to fix those asymmetries, which are mostly mental. Asymmetries is probably in the lead. Like something up here is going to bottleneck us at some point. Lifestyle asymmetries as well. Party too much on the weekends. This job's way too stressful. Things of that nature. And the recreational bodybuilder, because they're just more inclined to having a more holistic outlook on the situation, they're more likely to be like, yeah, okay, maybe we should only party once a week. I mean, most guys that want to compete aren't big partiers anyways, but they skip out on other things is what I'm saying. They're reckless in other ways typically because they're not afraid of the task at hand. They want to get there tomorrow in some cases. Whereas, again, a lot of recreational folks, it just gets to the point where it's like, hey, they took all the right remedial courses. They did all the small things, not just when it comes to physique, but again, like those bottlenecks that we constantly see. And then it's like, shoot, like before you know it, it's like, hey, next time you cut, if we lost 7% of your body weight on top of that, like you'd probably be shredded, dude. It's a very easy transition is what it ends up being. And I just see that happen way too often, that my recreational bodybuilders are like, hey, like, let's go for this. And most of the time I'm like, because I don't bring it up, I'm like, wanted to say something, but I didn't say something. And it's the exact opposite sometimes with like the guys that like want to be out of the box competitive bodybuilders. It's like, bro, I don't care if you just saw Christian Guzman's like last little summer shredded series. It's like, you cannot compete next year. You've never even had abs in your life, dude. Like, you've never dieted for more than 6 weeks. It's like, we have some things to do. So quite often the Recs end up being better competitive bodybuilders. But there's also a subset of people that like legit respect, I guess, the risk that come with doing anything competitively. And they're like, no, I just kind of rather squat my 400 pounds, like leave it here. And like, this is good and plenty. And I have a lot of respect for those people as well, because it's kind of built in human nature to get a little bit and then just want more and more and more and more. I mean, we all know this. We're never big enough, never lean enough, so on and so on.